the co-founder of Roots Action. He's a media critic, a columnist, a documentary filmmaker, and a retired journalism professor who founded the Media Watch Group FAIR in 1986. So with that, Jeff, it's all yours.
Thank you, Linda. The good news is I'm not coming to you from New York. I'm actually in Florida.
Oh, that's really good news.
Yeah. All right. I want to thank everyone for joining. I want to thank people who signed petitions and sent emails in the cause of getting Lacino Hamilton out of prison. I know the Huntington Woods Peace Group did some activism around it. We sure did at Roots Action Education Fund. So thank all of you that fought for Lacino's freedom, and thank all of you that have donated to help him get his feet on the ground, and keep donating at the GoFundMe page. It's an honor for me to be on the same platform as Lacino Hamilton, even if it's virtual, because he never gave up. He never gave in. It's a really inspiring story, despite the tragedy of what happened to him. What I'm going to do is sort of work through Lacino's story somewhat chronologically, and then we'll open it up to the whole group for your questions. Lacino, people know you were taken off to prison at age 19. Can you spend just a couple minutes? What was your childhood like? Your family situation, your level of education before you were railroaded to prison at age 19?
First, thank you for having me. And I would also like to personally thank everyone who contributed in any type of way to bring in some awareness and some pressure, and ultimately led to my release in September. So thank everyone. I grew up in the city of Detroit. I was born in '74, make me 46. I'll be 47 this year. My mother and father were both young. I think my mother was 13 when she became pregnant with me, 14 when I was conceived at. I was placed into the foster care system, and I was moved around for those first 2 or 3 years. At about age 4.5, I was placed with my mother, my foster mother, Willa Bias, and my dad, Rodney Bias. And my life was, pretty stable for the next 6-7 years. And then my foster father, Rodney, he died, and the state wanted to move me out of the home to a 2-family home, something that I didn't want, something that my parents didn't want. The state sort of makes a decision. By them knowing that I didn't want to go there, they sort of, tricked me into going there. Situation was, it was not a good situation. It didn't last long. I ended back with my mother. And then the state wanted to move me again. And at that point, I became a runaway at the age of 11. And from the age of 11 to 19, I was essentially on my own from that point on.
So your schooling was very sporadic.
So my schooling was very sporadic. At 16, I kept trying to go back. I had some sort of affinity or like school, it just wasn't working, wasn't compatible with, a lot of the things going on in my life at the time. So I eventually took my GED. I think I was 16, 17. I went to my GED. And, I kept trying my hand at school, but like I said, it wasn't compatible with, living and surviving by my wit or off the streets. So yeah, my schooling didn't go that far.
Many of us have read your insightful column for truthout.org, and that's how many of us know you, even when you were in prison, reading your columns. And your column was about what you called the gentrification to prison pipeline. And in that column, you referenced living in Detroit's Cass Corridor. which is where I'm sure many people on this call, even before you were born, they lived in the Cass Corridor, they worked in the Cass Corridor, they went to Wayne State University, and it was not gentrifying, it was poor at that point, decades ago. I'm just curious, can you talk about what you experienced, what you saw as that neighborhood gentrified, and how it connects to pushing people through that pipeline into prison?
Well, writing that article, 17, 18 years after I was in prison, was different than how I was actually experiencing it at the time. So experiencing at the time, I probably was clueless, like a lot of people, of exactly what was going on or why. It was probably afterwards, a combination of my reading, my studying, reflecting, and just seeing how the police and the courts were used as a part of a way to run certain populations out of the Cass Corridor, and I think myself being a part of that.
Yeah. In 1995, you're wrongfully convicted. How would you assess the quality of your legal representation? I've read a little bit about the trial. It didn't sound too good.
I mean, once again, a lot of this stuff is in retrospect. I mean, at the time, I knew I had a court-appointed attorney by the name of Robert Slamica, who essentially did nothing, And years later, it was revealed that I think this man had broke into a woman's home, was on probation 2 or 3 times, addicted to several hard narcotics. I just think that is that just reflects, the type of person he was, and the fact that he basically did nothing as far as representation.
Those of us who've never been on the inside, but we want to support prisoners and support prisoners' rights, what is it that we don't get? What is it that we don't fully understand about how awful, what are the worst things about prison that most of us wouldn't know?
I don't think there's a one thing, right? Like there's a one worst thing. I can sit there and tell you probably horror stories about every single thing in prison. I think the bigger thing that we don't get about prison is that we don't look at it as a form of oppression, right? Or as something human rights. And because of that, we don't respond to it the way that we have responded to other situations throughout the world of oppression, or where there's some sort of human rights violations. And that would be the biggest thing. We don't look at prison as a form of human rights violations, so.
What was there's something you had told me. You're taken off to prison. It's a wrongful conviction. You're so young. And you said to me that actually something positive happened, like a life-changing development, is some older inmates sort of took you under their wings, and they were very well read, and they were recommending books. Talk about your first years in that process that in some ways might have saved you or put you on a different trajectory.
So when I was incarcerated, when I was arrested, and when I was charged and taken to the county jail, I had a complete mental breakdown. And the county jail sent me to an outside mental facility to sort of, stabilize me. But what that meant was to drug you, So I was in the county jail for 18 months awaiting trial. And throughout that 18 months, I probably spent about 15 months going back and forth to an outside facility to be treated for acute depression. And it's like each time the medicine was increased. So when I make it to prison, I'm in a stupor, I'm lethargic, a year and a half of taking this medicine, not able to defend myself in an environment where a person is likely to have to do that. And I was fortunate to meet some older gentlemen one in particular by the name of Adika Menza, who had been incarcerated 22 years at that time, and basically took pity on me, to be truthful with you, and took me under his wing and began to introduce me to books and began to, his first instructions was me to get off the medicine, that I didn't need it. And on this man's instructions, I did. It took me a while but he introduced me to books, he introduced me to reading, he introduced me to a lot, and I'm thankful for him, and as well as a lot of other people in the environment who, like I said, it's an environment where one really has to focus on themselves more than anything. And those men took the time out to help me out.
Is he still around?
I was actually with him a couple of days ago. So after 38 years, he was finally released, and he was released actually in 2012. And he's doing pretty well. He's living in Jackson, Michigan. He's doing pretty well.
And he's living in Jackson. Was he in Jacktown, or was he in the Jackson State Prison?
That's where I actually met him at. I actually met him in the Jackson State Prison in 1996.
What were some of the books? One thing you mentioned to me once was that a book that you found life-changing was Soledad Brother, The Prison Letters of George Jackson. And that book came out in 1970. And I'm sure there's many people on this call my age who read that book when it came out. And George Jackson, for those who don't know the story, he was sentenced to 1 year to life for accused of robbing a gas station in Los Angeles of $70. And when he's about 28 years old, he writes this book of prison letters. Within a year, he had been shot dead. After the book came out, within a year, he's shot dead by a San Quentin guard, a tower guard. You read the book decades after it came out. Talk about that book and other books that might have been important for you as you self-educate.
Well, early on, the Adika Menza, as well as a lot of the other men who were, mentoring me or exposing me to books, they all impressed upon me that the judicial system does not work. These men were adamant about that the system doesn't work. I would be lucky if it did work. And if I was going to have to educate myself, I was going to have to become the best version of myself that I possibly could, because I had a fight on my hands. And I want to say that Soledad Brothers was like one of the very first books I read. And it just spoke to me that the man George Jackson was a person like myself, from just basically a poor Black male who had been railroaded. And reading his critiques about the government or about foreign policy or about the economy, things that I never even thought about in any real way. And I kept thinking that this was a person like myself who came to prison uneducated, and that he was going to be the example that I was going to follow. So early in those beginning days when I didn't have a clue of what to do, I used George Jackson as my example, and to try to start trying to pattern my life after.
And in the years where you're educating yourself, you wrote literally thousands of letters to the outside in search of help. And you got a typewriter at some point to write these letters and mail them out. What were you seeking to find on the outside, and how long did it take before you actually found someone on the outside who was willing and able to give you the help you needed?
So a lot of the things that I discovered over time were not, because I'm some mastermind or anything. A lot of things were sort of by accident, and the writing was one as well. So going to the law library, Once again, the older gentlemen were encouraging me to write law schools, professors, just anybody, right, in that field. So I had been in prison maybe a year or so. I was in segregation, and I received a letter from the Wayne State Law Clinic that said they received 10,000 letters a year just like mine, and they can only help the extraordinary people. And when I first heard that, I was upset because I thought that what happened to me was extraordinary, and I should fit into that. But later on, it just sort of hit me that if the Wayne State Law Clinic is receiving 10,000 letters a year, then probably everybody that I'm writing are receiving large volumes of letters, and they're probably saying the same thing, minus a detail here or there. So it like sort of dawned upon me that I got to keep writing these letters, right? I can't stop because it's one of the few things that I have available that I can do. So that's the point where the education actually kicked in, that at that moment, I realized I have to teach myself how to write, because I'm going to have to write. It's 10,000 letters, and I have to be able to make my letters stick out. And it's not the details. It's not that I was wrongly convicted or the police lied. What is going to make my letter stick out is essentially the way that I write it, the way that I tell my story or articulate it, hopefully. So that's what began the Lacino, you need to teach yourself how to write. And that sort of took just a larger life of itself. So, and I just wrote anybody. It was at some point, I could watch the news and I could hear somebody say something. It didn't matter. Anybody that appeared to have any type of humanity, heart, cared about any sort of issue, talk show host, every major media outlet you can imagine. I just wrote everybody. I believe that somebody, it only take one person, I kept saying. And so I do want to say this, a woman who sort of gets overlooked and, she sort of wanted it that way is a woman by the name of Dr. Dorothy B. Farden. I met Dr. Dorothy B. Farden in 1998. She's from Frederick, Maryland. She teaches at Bowie State University, BOWIE, Bowie State University, Maryland. She was running something called the Sojourner Truth Farm, and she had a small pamphlet where prisoners could write articles, and she would either retype them or sometimes sort of Xerox them. And I guess her mailing list was probably primarily people incarcerated. This was the first person that just believed in me. And I remember the first letter I received from her, she was on an airplane somewhere and she was writing me. And I would say for maybe the first, I want to say maybe 10 years, with the exception of Chokeway, she was my only advocate, the only person who was, willing to try to do the things that I was trying anything. So the only person that was like, all right, if you're willing to try it, it sounds crazy, but so until Claudia Whitman came along in 2010.
And for people that aren't from the Detroit area, may not know, one of your heroes and guiding light was Chokwe Lumumba, who people know in Detroit, old timers, as a radical lawyer born and raised in Detroit, who moved to Jackson, Mississippi, became the mayor. He unfortunately died at the age of 60. He died young. Talk about how important Chokwe Lumumba was to you.
Well, I met Chokwe Lumumba when I was younger, about 17, 18, had no idea who he was or any sort of contributions he may have made to social justice. But I did know that he was someone who cared about people and things of that. But at the time, I wasn't focused on the thing that Chokwe was. When I was incarcerated, I began to read, and the name Chokwe Lumumba, I kept coming across that name, and I just kept wondering, was it the man that I knew? And I wrote him a letter and asked him. And from there, a correspondence and a friendship, more of a mentor. He was more of a mentor and a father figure, than like a friend. But over the years, he took time out of his life, no matter whether he was city council, whether he was an attorney, whether he was running for mayor, whether he had big cases like the Scott sisters who were wrongfully incarcerated. It didn't matter what he was doing. He took the time out to educate me as what he was doing about being a man and about life and about my responsibility to myself and others. And I'm appreciative.
Of the 26 years in prison, spent a lot of those years in solitary confinement. Can you talk about that and what were the authorities' justifications for throwing you into solitary?
So the first time I went to segregation, I've been in prison about a year and a half. I was segregated, as strange as it may sound, based upon a confidential informant who said that myself and 7 or 8 other men, it's just a wild story. We're going to kidnap the ward and take over the prison, a bunch of, but ultimately, it was more so about the self-education, as hard as it may believe. Let me tell this a couple of different ways, right? First, let me say this. The first time I went to segregation, I had no idea that people could be in segregation for any really length. I have been in minimum security prisons where people may spend a week, 30 days, more on the more extreme, 6 months, a year. That was my prison experience. When I was segregated, I was sent to barrack of maximum security based on a confidential statement. It's formality that when you go to a maximum security prison, you immediately see the security classification committee and they read your file and they tell you at that moment what you can expect. The warden told me to consider myself in the hole indefinitely. As ignorant as I was, I didn't even know what the word indefinitely meant. So when I go back to the housing unit, the older gentlemen are asking me, what did they say to me? Because they know they're going to tell you what to expect. I told them that the warden told me to consider myself in the hole indefinitely. And I asked the gentleman what it meant. He said that meant you never getting out of the hole. And I said, whatever, right? To me, it was a scare tactic. And I told the gentleman that, and he said, man, if the warden told you you're never getting out the hole, you're never getting out the hole. And I don't believe him because, like I say, from my experience, and the man started yelling. He come to his door because we're behind these steel doors, and he begins yelling names. He says, Bell Bay, how many years have you been in the hole? And Bell Bay says, I've been in the hole 12 years. He says, Green Eyes, how long have you been in the hole? He says, I've been in the hole 7 years. He says, Kenyatta Yield, how long have you been in the hole? He said, I've been in the hole 11 years. He said, how much longer you got to go? He said, well, they told me I'm gonna spend the rest of my prison time in here, which means I got 9 more years. And they went on and on. I didn't know something like this even existed. The last time I was segregated was in 2017. I was talking to 2 women. I'm sorry, I can't remember their name. They're from Kansas, and they file human rights complaints. When they asked me what do I think would be something good they can do or where they can start, I told them you can start with a man named Money Mont, who's been in segregation since 1986 in Michigan. And they told him he would die in segregation. 6 days later, I was summoned to the control center. I was placed in segregation. My security level was raised from a level 2 to maximum security. I was placed on security threat group status, which is the prison's version of a terrorist, for that conversation. I've never met the man, Money Mont. I've only heard of his situation. But because I was, I guess, telling other people in the world who may care or do something about it, I was placed in segregation, spent about a year in segregation, 2 or 3, basically my last 2 or 3 years in maximum security for that.
Sure.
So.
And how many different stints were there in segregation? Like
I was
3,
repeatedly in seg. So I always tell people that the prison's number one issue is control. Their number one issue is to make sure 54 or 45, whatever the number is, those number of thousands of men and women are doing exactly what they're told to do at any particular moment in time, right? The prison micromanages our time, our space, our movement. Everything in the day is micromanaged. At any given time, they can probably look on the computer and say, where is prisoner Hamilton? And they will know. Well, it's easier to control an ignorant population than one that is informed. It just, I mean, this is an historical fact, that we just see throughout the world when these human rights or these tyrants or dictators or whoever, right? And that's what the prison is. The prison is a tyrant and a dictator. So I was basically repeatedly placed in segregation for educating other men. I was in prison 26 years. I have no fighting tickets. I have no weapon tickets. I have no assault tickets. I have no violence on my record. Nothing that would justify, because most of the men who are segregated and placed in maximum security as I was, the justification usually is that they're violent and that, I have no violence on my record at all,
Given that the main phenomenon in a prison is to keep control and to micromanage and know where you are every second and make sure that they're controlling your every movement. What was the weirdest thing to get adjusted to beginning September 30th of last year?
Nothing is weird. All the weird stuff was prior to September 30th, right? That was all the weird stuff. The shakedowns, the cavity checks, like I say, the micromanaged schedule, 5 minutes here, 3 minutes here. Those were the weird things. All of the things that I've experienced now, even my car crash last night, were just natural things. Somebody told me last night, I said, man, I had my first car crash. And they say, man, you sound happy. I said, man, you know how many men and women would have loved to have been in a car crash last night as opposed to taking count in a prison? So I was not happy, but, it was an experience I wouldn't have had 4 or 5 months ago, and as much as I don't like that experience, to think that my life has some variety and, just something more than the mundane things I've been used to.
And we're happy about it too. The Biden administration announced last month, just as Obama administration had done near the end of 2016, that they were going to not continue any more contracts with private prisons, privately owned for-profit federal prisons. You were in different Michigan prisons, state-owned prisons. Can you talk about the profiteering that goes on in a state-owned prison, putting aside a prison that's completely for profit?
Yeah, so when I heard Biden say, that when he get in office, he's gonna eliminate the private prisons, right? The first thing I thought is that Michigan has no private prisons in the sense that no private companies own the prison. We had one in Baldwin, Michigan at one time where they were keeping youth, but all of the facilities are owned by the state of Michigan. Yet every facility in Michigan is privatized. And what I mean by that is when you go into a Michigan prison, the phones that we use are owned by a private company, Embark. And the food service is owned by a private company. And the healthcare is owned by a private company. And the dentist is owned by a private company. And the commissary is owned by a private company. And then the list goes on. So while we're looking for some particular company, it's a way more advanced way to privatize a prison as opposed to letting one company run the prison You allow it to be a state prison and just let all the private companies, what Joe Biden has said doesn't even begin to address that. Second of all, I want people to think of this, that if you got a bunch of packages arriving to your garage and you say, well, we're going to stop these packages from coming to this garage. All right. But you still got to do something with the packages. That's essentially where we're at. Even if you close the private prisons, you're not doing anything that feeds the private prisons. So essentially, this is how I see it. Joe Biden doesn't have to sign anything with prison. He doesn't have to touch prisons. We don't have to do anything as far as policy, right? We can begin to affect the things that feed the prison. There's a lot of commonalities, a lot of correlations. So let's attack that, as opposed to saying we're going to close a prison and find other ways to privatize them, like Michigan has.
Yeah, I want to ask you about a few years ago when there was an acquittal in the killing of Trayvon Martin in Florida. And then that was in 2013, there was the police shooting of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, and you're on the inside, and Black Lives Matter movement mushrooms. How did you look at that? How did other inmates, were people following that closely? Was that a source of inspiration in any way?
I mean, it was, as soon, when Black Lives Matter, a lot of prisoners started saying incarcerated lives matter. Believe it or not, the food, work, prison, hunger strikes that have taken place in prison throughout the country, a lot of that was inspired from out of Alabama, the prisoners in Alabama. And I know from my personal contact in dealing with those prisoners that the Black Lives Matter was a great sense of inspiration, that when they seen people standing up, they said, we got to stand up in here, and that we have to pull our own weight. And so I do know that the food, work, and hunger strikes, whether they're giving credit for that or not, was the Black Lives Matter movement was a great inspiration and played a part in that.
You've suggested to me that some of the nonprofit public interest groups that work for prisoners' rights, that they don't include the voices of prisoners. They don't include prisoners in their strategy. And talk a little bit about that.
So one of the things I would do is I would look at Michigan, and I would see that Michigan compared to other states, right? You may look at a California or a Philadelphia, even a Colorado, and see that they had quite a few large prisoner rights groups, right? And I began to notice that prisoners were sort of prominent in these groups. So I began to write some of the groups here in Michigan, the ACLU, American Friends, Cure, Michigan Cure, and would say, well, where's the Michigan prisoner participation? And can we write in your newsletters? Can we set an agenda? And what I basically found is that prisoners just aren't really included. And when we are included, we're not included. We're included more so as props. We're not really included as, what do you think about it? Or you can lead and we'll assist. So I'm just a firm believer that the people that we say that we're advocating on or working on, ultimately they're going to have to do the heavy work.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just my personal belief, right? And in order for them to do the work, they got to be able to do the work. And a lot of the work isn't being done because people are preventing that work from being done. It's just like I tell people now, and I just want to be honest with your audience, right? So I tell a lot of the other exonerees that a lot of people want to hear our story. They want to hear our story, but that's the extent of what they want to hear. People don't really ask us about policy. They wouldn't think to ask me about the Gaza Strip or the International Monetary Fund, or it doesn't really cross their mind to ask me that, right? Or ask other incarcerated men and women that. They don't see us as intellectuals. They don't see us as strategic thinkers or that. And some of this stuff may be unbiased. I don't know. I mean, just unconsciously thinking like this. But people don't think to include a prisoner when it comes. So when we're mapping out a campaign, they don't think that maybe the prisoners should map out the campaign. And maybe it has something to do with the fact that 70% of the people that come to prison do so without a high school diploma or GED. Or some of our, I don't know if any of that plays in. But for the most part, what I'm seeing is that the social justice community, for the most part, is an educated-led community, and it doesn't seek the informed opinions or the ideas of prisoners. They don't. So prisoners get left out of critical phases of the work that needs to be done to abolish prisons.
And talk about your ideal, and this is a good time for me to pitch. If anyone can afford to go to the GoFundMe page to keep you going for a few months, what would be your dream? What would you like to be doing in the next year or few years on behalf of prisoners?
Basically what I'm doing now, any and everything I can to assist them in some of their personal fights for to prove their innocence. So since I've come home, the Wayne County Conviction Integrity Unit has released about I've been on 4 months. The Conviction Integrity Unit has released about 5 people. They're going to release another person tomorrow, right? I tell myself that Michigan only has 2 Conviction Integrity Units. We got one in Wayne County, and we have one that's ran from the Attorney General's office. I'm unaware of the number of people released from the Attorney General, but I know it's small in part because it's a new office. But the one out of Wayne County has released over 30 people in 3 years. If one Conviction Integrity Unit has found that level of criminality, is really what it is on the part of the police and the prosecutors, then there should be a lot more done in the way of conviction and check. I think every county should have one. Every court, every prosecutor to next to their office probably should be every conviction integrity unit. Like I say, just based upon what's being found out of one. And no one is looked in Saginaw, Flint, Barron County, you know what I'm saying? We're only looking basically in Detroit. Yeah. And we have to think that if things are happening in Detroit at that level, they're probably happening in other places.
Here's a question from someone in the chat that's interesting, from Rich Peacock. When you were in prison and when you received a letter, what did you like to read about? What ideas or themes were helpful or encouraging to you?
Anything. It meant something. So the first 14, 15 years of my prison, I really didn't have any visits, any outside contact from family or most of my friends. So for the people who may be unaware, the person who was murdered in my case was my foster mother, right? It pains me to say that, foster mother. It's become, prior to this whole situation, I never would have referred to my mom as my foster mom. The only mom I've ever known.
Right.
Period.
Yeah.
How to tie my shoes, how to blow my nose, how to use my knife, and I mean, you name it. How to sew, how to cook, how to, if you meet a woman, do this, everything. So it's just kind of strange now to, like I say, to have to refer to my mom like that, right? But
yeah.
I just sort of forgot the question. I apologize for that.
Yeah. So what was particularly encouraging when you did get letters from the outside?
It was just encouraging that somebody cared, that somebody was taking the time out. I mean, people wrote me so many, so I was fortunate, right? There's a woman named Sylvia Panetta I met about the last, it says in Howes, New York, most incredible woman. Sylvia's in her 70s. When the police wrongfully like raided her, she lost her house, she lost her livelihood, lost everything. Sylvia right now lives in a car in Howes, New York, right? She's been homeless for the last 2 or 3 years, and she's learned how to be homeless. And reading letters from her, she wrote me like every day. When I say every day, she wrote me every day from the time I met her until the time I was released. So I kind of learned about how, as she was learning to be homeless, I was learning as well from the things she shared with me through her letter. So her friendship meant a lot to me, that someone whose life had been just thrown in a whirlwind like that still took the time every day to write me in her car, and in between her scheduled bathroom breaks at Walmart or something, right? I met so many people, and through those people, I was able to experience their experiences, right? And if it wasn't for the many different people that I met, I would have never been able to educate myself, because there came a period in prison where the MDOC began to liquidate the libraries of anything that could, stimulate any type of real thought. So if it wasn't for people sending me articles, and sometimes people would tell me, what type of books do you like? And I would tell them, send me whatever you're reading, because I have such a limited ability to know what's being read, who's writing, who's authors. So it meant a lot when people would just send me a book that they were reading to expose me to a new author or a new subject or topic. That was one of the big things about when we say they got a saying like, he who has himself for a teacher has a student for a fool, right? And it kind of makes sense when you think about it. So I knew nothing about I don't know anything about educating myself. I know about reading, and maybe I could gather something from it. So, but I have to say that I've met so many people from the academic community, so many professors from California, from Maryland, from you name it, New York, Illinois, Colorado, that befriended me, wrote me, would send me books, would send me syllabus, would allow me to write syllabus, eventually gave me opportunities to speak to their classes. I'm all that to say that without outside connection, I don't know. It's easy for me to sit here and say I never would have gave up. But when you start taking things out of the equation, I don't know what I would have did without letters and friendships, and I don't know.
Melanie, we should include other questions. I just wanted to ask one more about Maya Shenwar. She's a mutual friend of Lacino's and myself. For many of you know truthout.org, one of the most important independent news websites. And many of us learned about, in Roots Action Education Fund, we learned about Lacino's case because of truthout.org. And that's the outlet that we were reading Lacino's columns. How did you hook up with Maya, Maya's late sister who's passed away? She was incarcerated herself. But how did that work out, where you got to know Maya, who's this independent journalist?
So first, let me go back to Claudia, right? So yeah. I meet Claudia Whitman. Claudia Whitman, she lives in Mancos, Colorado. I don't know, little bitty old white lady, right? Who goes around the country and assists Black men in death row and wrongfully incarcerated cases, right? I meet Claudia in 2010 through a man by the name of Danny Burton. Danny Burton, I think Claudia had Danny Burton's case ultimately for 17 years. He was exonerated last year. That was the longest case she had in Michigan. But he introduced me to Claudia. I wrote Claudia, and Claudia thought I was the most arrogant, and you just name it, right? And I'm telling Claudia all these great things about me and things. And so the relationship started out rocky. What I wanted to explain to Claudia was, which I ultimately did. I wrote her a letter and said, listen, I don't have the time for you to find these things out 3 months from now, a year from now. I honestly believe she would. I don't have that time. So I need to tell you right now, because they told me to die in prison. And I don't have any time I need you to understand certain things right now. Right. So I forgot this question again. I need to apologize for that.
No, it was, how did you meet Maya? And then you said the other woman in your life that was so key was Claudia.
So Claudia sends me a letter in like 2011 or 12 and tells me that this woman named Maya is writing a book about prison. And because, you know, it's a major study of mine, maybe I should tell a little bit about myself. That's exactly what I did, almost verbatim. Somebody told me you were writing a book about prison and that maybe some of the things I've learned or experienced could be of assistance. And you know how they say the rest is history, you know. At that time, she was writing a book about her sister. Locked Down and Locked Out is the name of the book. It sort of told the story of her sister's drug addiction and how that led her to prison and how prison complicated every other problem in her life. And unfortunately, Maya's sister is no longer with us, you know. But like I say, I met her a lot of the times I think about the fact that I'm here having this conversation. It's like everything is sort of like luck. Like none of the things that worked sort of worked the way they were supposed to work. You know, Claudia did not know Claudia. Claudia did not know Maya. She was not personal friends. I don't even know where she received that information from, right? But it's like we kind of stumbled up on her, and stumbling up on Maya was kind of like one of the best things that could happen to me, right? The first person who said, I've been writing articles for, you know, so contrary to what people may think about prisoners do a lot, right? So there are several prisoners probably here in Michigan now who run their own newsletters off their typewriters. They'll sit down and type up 6 or 7 pages, run off 50 or 60 copies and mail them themselves or send them home. And that's so I wrote a lot of small publications over the years, but I had never really been published anywhere or anybody, you know, thought that a larger audience, an educated audience may want to read. So I met, like I say, and it was so huge for me as personally, as well as ultimately for my release.
Maya Shenwar has told us about her sister, that her sister gave birth inside the prison, shackled to equipment is how she gave birth. I mean, the whole thing, anyone who's a humanitarian or progressive is just sickened by mass incarceration. And some people have asked about alternatives to mass incarceration. Melanie, do you want to get a question in here or from someone?
Yeah, there are 2 questions that are related. Next steps to reach your goals and personal plans for the future.
So while I was in prison, I was often encouraged to write about my story, write about things I've been through. And anyone who knows me know I always pushed back and thought that what was happening to me was less important than what was happening as a whole. Like, you know, so one of the things I told Jeff is that my entire story is not typical, right? Most men do not go to prison and educate themselves. It's not that sort of environment, right? I say that to say that, like you say, personal goals, my personal goals are to be as effective as I can as an advocate for men and women who are incarcerated, as well as for populations that we know feed the prison population, right? Homeless, unemployed. Women are the fastest growing population of incarcerated people, Black women in particular. So those are my personal goals. My personal goals are to figure out how I can be most effective to assist others like myself. I would not be here if people didn't assist me. That's all I wanted. When I used to be in prison, I just wanted somebody to help me. I wanted somebody to listen. I would send a letter. I was hoping to get a letter back. I just wanted somebody to write me back. I understand that there are thousands of men and women in that position right now, and not just in the criminal justice system. There are thousands of men that are homeless, men and women in abusive relationships, poverty places people in situations. I just want to be of some assistance and find ways to do that.
When you say women are the fastest growing prison population, I saw something on mainstream news yesterday that the strong majority of women behind bars it's clearly nonviolent offenders. It's usually mixed up in drug sales or drug, but it's nonviolence, and we're just filling up the prisons with women.
And it matters because incarceration is not just incarceration. Incarceration is different when it affects women. For an example, if a man goes to jail, 80% of the time, if he has a child, that child remains with the woman. It's just the opposite when a woman goes to jail. 80% of the time, that child is going to end up outside of that family. If not out of state, out of home, foster care, etc. It's like that in every way. When women are incarcerated, every statistic is worse. So I just say that to say that it's one thing to say it means something to say that they're the fastest growing population, and it means something understanding the role women play in our families and in the community. You know, it matters. So
yeah. Melanie, you want one more? Or?
No, there's, so everybody feel free to either raise your hand. There should be an option to do that. Or put a question in the chat. But right now, mostly what's in the chat is just a lot of love and thank yous for sharing your story and compelling a greater group of people to get off their butts and do something.
And I wanted you to talk a little bit about the movement for abolishing prison. That's the goal, is to move to a society where we don't put people behind bars, even if they do bad things. Talk about the abolition movement and why that should be the goal.
So the first thing is, I don't believe there's any way that we can make prison better, right? I don't think that. It goes back to what I said before about the how we view prison, right? Prison's job is to try to, like I say, to put me in a particular space. I often tell people to think of a loaf of bread, right? Think that you got this loaf of bread, this big loaf of bread, and you're trying to stuff this loaf of bread into a glass or something, right? And think of all the, the sort of the violence, all the things you got to do to try to push it down in there and make it fit. And it's probably not going to fit. And then when it comes out, it's probably going to look gross, probably something you're not going to want to have nothing to do with. It's not going to look edible. And that's sort of how prison is, right? Prison forces human beings into this small little non-human space, right? And in order to do that, personality, agency, personal agency, these things have to be no longer a part of your personal makeup, right? The prison becomes your brain, because the prison is going to tell you where to be at 5 o'clock, not only where to be, but what to do. Not only what to do, but how to do it. Not only how to do it, but how fast or slow, etc. So you don't really need a brain or anything while you're in prison, because the prison is going to think for you. So a lot of times, like when people, like we have a 60 or 70% recidivism rate or something, right? I wonder, how do you expect someone to, it's sort of like that loaf of bread. You would not take that loaf of bread and put it out in Kroger or Myers. No one would ever touch it. No one would ever want it. And that's sort of how we doing prisoners. we're forcing them into something that we know is going to leave them not in a shape to maybe be successful in a larger environment, because it's like that loaf of bread. It wouldn't be successful in any grocery store, nowhere probably in America. So having said that, we have to think about, so somebody would tell me, well, what are we doing in the meanwhile? The first thing I'm gonna say is I don't have that answer in and of myself. There's a lot of things that we can do, right? There's a lot of small things that we can do. But ultimately, I think as a people, we gotta say that we can do better. We can do better than just, even me. I sit back and think about now, I plan on going on in living a productive life, right? And I think I think about this. If I wouldn't have been released, I guess the story would have been, I gotta be incarcerated, because if I'm not incarcerated, then I'm gonna be some danger to myself and others. That's clearly not the case. We're gonna see that's not the case. It's not just not the case in Lacino's case. It's not the case in a lot of people's case. We can do better. I know we can do better than what we're currently doing, essentially just throwing people away.
And from reading your columns in truthout.org, and I encourage people to go to truthout.org, type in Lacino Hamilton. You write a lot about, we need to change the system. If the system provides jobs and education and health and housing, you're not going to need the police apparatus, the prison apparatus, et cetera, et cetera. It's why.
So a lot of times when people hear to abolish prisons, that's what they think of, just physically removing prisons. Much of the work of abolition, it must be done outside of prisons. Like I say, prisons are on the back end of problems. Police courts and prisons happen after something has happened, right? So a prison in and of itself is on the back end of it, right? Like I was saying before, there are 70% of the prison population is uneducated or, lack formal education. So much percentage of the population is Black. So much percentage of the population is poor. So much percentage of the population is homeless, etc. Much of the work of prison abolition is done outside of that. A lot of the things that feed prison, the commonalities, the things that we know that correlate with incarceration. A lot of the abolition work does not require a person to try to physically destroy a prison. We need to start cutting off things that we know are likely or a greater probability to help feed the prison system. So for an example, the school to prison pipeline. Someone was telling me that we should build more schools as a way to eliminate more prisons. And then I said, well, they have this thing called the school to prison pipeline, which shows the connection between the school system and prisons. So building more schools does not seem like it will likely stop more prisons if the schools are feeding the prisons. And the schools then essentially are feeding the prisons because what the schools are teaching are essentially useless in some places. So I live in a neighborhood, I live in a neighborhood in Detroit, or the neighborhood I'm from and I frequent is 7 Mile and Hoover. It is called the Red Zone. It is a gang-infested neighborhood. I went through my neighborhood and took some video and put it on my Facebook page. It's unbelievable that this is America, that you can ride through a neighborhood and entire blocks are missing, or an entire block, one house is on the entire, or all the houses on the block are burned up. It doesn't, so if schools are not addressing that and teaching people to deal with their immediate problems, then schools are likely to continue doing what they've been doing. I'm saying that we're just gonna have to do things different. We're gonna have to experiment. We're gonna have to try things. We're gonna have to try things that don't have a proven outcome already. Right? It would be it's almost in the sense of, if something isn't working, why keep trying it? And why does prison become the exception? Why does the court become an exception, or the prison or the police become an exception? If we know something isn't working, I think it needs to be changed, even if we don't know exactly. So let me back up. Let me say a couple things before we end this conversation. One, I try to frame what happened to me as a form of cheating, right? I try to form what happened to me as a form of cheating. We have a competitive criminal justice system, right? They call it an adversarial system, where you got the prosecutors against the defense, right? And they're competing for a win or a loss. Well, as I explain to people, in every competitive system in life, there's cheating. In football, people cheat. In baseball, they cheat. In jacks, in cars, in races, somebody trying to get a head start, somebody trying to get some performance enhancing. In anything in life where there is competition, cheating comes with it. It's like, it's one of them things that you just can't separate the two. Well, if you have a competitive criminal justice system, then you're saying we know that there's going to be some cheating involved, because in every competitive arena, there's cheating. And cheating looks like what happened to me, right? Cheating looks like a 40 or 50 or 60-year sentence. It looks like, well, we're not going to let that evidence in. Well, why did you pull him over? I pulled him over because he didn't use his turn signal. That man's cheating. We have to create a system where we know there's not going to be cheating. See, we might accept it in football, we might accept it in baseball, but how do you accept it when it comes to justice? How do you even accept that cheating is going to be part of the equation? You can't accept it when we giving courts or police or people that level of power. We can't say that people who have this level of authority, that cheating is going to be a part of that equation. It can't be. That's why this system has to be abolished. We have to create a system to where it is what we say it is. It's about justice. It's about how do we repair a wrong or a harm? How do we reconcile this? You know what I'm saying? How do we restore this family, this community? That has to be the end goal. It can't be winning and losing. It can't be, the prosecutor and the defense have to work together. They can't be working as he's going to win or he's going to lose. At the end of the day, everybody got to walk away from that situation knowing that we did everything we can to repair what has happened. And currently, that's not what our system is about. Our system is about that judge can say, I locked up more people than anybody else. I mean, for us to know what it takes and how something has to be vetted, you know what I'm saying? For all the people that had to approve that campaign slogan, that's what you're running on. I locked up more people than anybody else. I gave away 1 million years. I made more arrests. See, they're winning. And they know they're winning, so they're going to keep doing the things that to help them win. And some people, maybe not all of them, but some people are going to cheat. And because we know that, and we know the outcome of tragedy, of cheating. Look at me, I lost 26 years. I tell people every day, this is what my 26 years, for me, maybe not everybody, but for me. So as a kid, you watch these movies of these Christmas movies, and Christmas past comes to see you, Christmas future and Christmas present. And they take this person and show them 20, 30 years later what their life is going to look like. That's what my release has been like. And it's been like that because of what I told you. I wasn't writing cousins and aunties and uncles. I don't know about the birthday. I don't know that she has 3 kids and he has 4. I don't know that he's tall and he's short. I don't know that she lost a leg or he lost a finger. I learned all of this stuff when I got out of prison. So I got to see what everybody's life looked like 25 years later. That's what my life is like. My life is like that movie where somebody is showing me what the world is going to look like. Hey, they got computers, they got email, they got this. I have no sense of nothing. I can't even, so people say, man, you don't, so you done grew up in Detroit and you don't know Detroit? Every landmark is different, literally. I cry every day. Every day I cry. Men from prison call me all the time. I got a friend named Javon. Javon is doing life in prison. He's one of the strongest people I know. When I hung up the phone, I started crying because of that strength. When I thought about how strong he was, I kept asking myself, why did I have to be so strong? See, that's what, people applaud me, and I believe me, I'm appreciative of it. But I had to do extraordinary. I had to write over 10,000 letters. Some men and women in prison can't even read and write. So they won't be able to do that extraordinary thing. It's a lot of people who will never be published. That's extraordinary for a prisoner to be published in a magazine or something. I had to be so strong. And I cry about that because I didn't want to be strong. I just wanted to be Sino. I didn't want to be none of the other things I had to be. And every day I think about that. So I did my 26 years resisting. I did not do my 26 years following rules. I did not do my 26 years. You know how many times I've been in a warden's office and they'll say, Hamilton, just run some of these programs we got. And I'll send you anywhere you want to go. And I'll say, as much as I want to go somewhere better than where I'm at, I will never run in one of your programs. I will never do anything to assist the MDOC. I do not want a prison job. If I take a prison job, it's because there's something in it that's going to help me get free. It's not because I want to see the prison run better. I want to see the prison run efficiently. I didn't want to be that person. I didn't want to be some guy is not getting the medical attention he deserves. And I hear it. I say, well, you finna go to the hole because somebody got to go down here and stand up for that guy. I didn't want to do that. But I felt I had to. And I knew I was going to go to max. I knew I'd go to segregation.
I hear you.
Majority of the men and women in prison will never be as strong as I was. Not because I'm strong or I'm special. I often wonder where the strength come from. And we didn't create a system where people got to be extraordinary to get justice, and people got to be extraordinary to survive. So that truck that I destroyed, that I got to get fixed, I done put 12,000 miles on that truck in 3 months. I visited literally hundreds of prisoners. I visited hundreds of prisoners since I've been home and sat in their homes, talked to them and their families. And even the men that don't go back to prison, even the men that get jobs and get families, and these are anecdotal, I don't have it, but I mean, out of those hundreds of men, 80% of them are alcoholics. Those men are, prison breaks you down. Only thing, prison wants to control you. You cannot, like I tell people, you can't be you in prison. You can't be, which means you can't be human. Because if you got a larger than life personality, how does a larger than life personality fit in a place where everything is micromanaged? How does charisma fit in there? How does leadership, how does anything fit in there in a space that's designed to take, because it's easier to manage you the less. That's one of the reasons why, like when you go to maximum security prisons or stuff, they take the property because it's easier to manage you. It's easier to move you. it's just easier to control you. So I like to say, we creating a system that we know harms people. We're creating a system where we know that a lot of the people that come into the system have pre-existing conditions, right? You know, and in order to survive, that they have to be extraordinary. And then, like I say, the majority of people just average everyday people like anybody else, and they're not extraordinary. And they're gonna come out of that. Majority of the people that come out of that in that situation will never be who they possibly could have been. Like I say, even if they don't reoffend, like to take the 26 years from me, right? I mean, we can just say, I mean, good or bad. We don't know where I would be right now. But that's 26 years of not knowing what could have been.
Lacino, I hate to interrupt your passionate statements here, but we do have some questions, and it's getting late. So the question is kind of related to, actually, Lisa Youngs, do you still have a question? Would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Sure, thank you. So I'm a social work student at Wayne, and I have like a lot of interest in prison abolition and different forms of, like, you know, dealing with harm in a community. Like if harm is committed, there's a reason why it was committed, and it usually has to do with someone's needs not being met, whether those are mental health needs, whether those are needs that are just completely, you know, just basic needs that like people don't have the resources to provide for themselves, right? So like from my perspective, so much of this is just based in, like, you know, prioritizing, like you said, Lacino, you were saying that like the criminal justice system is competitive, right? Like this system has an interest in incarcerating people because they employ incarcerated people, right? They have an interest in getting people into that system and getting convictions and just putting bodies into prison. So if those like competitive aspects are taken out of our society, which like seem to have a lot to do with capitalism, like what would your first thing be? Like what would be the first need you would meet in communities, like, or as a form of attacking the prison system from an abolitionist perspective, right? Like what would be the first thing you would do? Like what would be your number one priority that you would like that you would go toward in order to get people's needs met?
I guess the first thing would say is that, you know, it depends on where you at. Every need is different, right? Even in prison. So you could be in Michigan and be in one prison and go to another prison, and them prisoners might be dealing with a lot of different things. I would say the most common thing to me is really education. I think we need to find so many different ways to educate the prison population and our overall population, you know, in general. You know, most people are unaware of what goes on in our police, courts, and prisons. And let me say this, what the courts do with criminal justice is just a fraction of what courts do. So when I say police, courts, and prisons, when they're taking land and doing eminent domain and contracts, etc., what you said, often we talk about criminal justice, social justice, and we never even mention the word capitalism. We never even mention the word imperialism. We never even begin to talk that people have an interest, that perhaps the system isn't broken. Perhaps it didn't work for me, but it worked for Detective Fleming or Prosecutor Ruth Carter. Maybe it worked for them, even though it didn't work for me. So the biggest thing I think is we have to do more in informing people, more in educating people. And when I mean that, around their educating people around their specific needs, right? So let me, once again, long-winded, but let me tell you a quick story. I got a friend named Cardinal Chewy, been coming in and out of Michigan prisons for 20 years, maybe longer than that. Cardinal Chewy becomes the sponsor for the NAACP. First week he comes in, Cardinal Chewy says, I'm going to teach you all a leadership class, and I'll be running, etc. I stand up. Cardinal Chewy is a personal friend of mine who I love and I respect. And I tell Cardinal Chewy, I don't appreciate what you just did. I say, how are you going to come in prison and just teach us a leadership class? How do you even know that's what we need right now? I mean, leadership could always be important, but what are we dealing with suicide right now? What are we dealing with depression right now? What are we dealing with the water? What are we dealing with COVID? He just came into prison, a man who loves prisoners. Cardinal Chewy loves prisoners. He probably will be in them prisons until he dies. But he just took it for granted that he knew. And I'm saying, so what I'm saying is that even in some of these situations where I'm saying education, we have to come into these situations and figure out what people need and assist them in how they can begin to solve problems. So the biggest thing, like I say, is education, and the education has to be designed around specific and immediate things going on.
Any other questions?
Thank
Yes.
you so much for that response.
Yes,
I really
in
appreciate
part.
that.
Yes, we have other questions. What can we as a group be doing to help prisoners systemically and directly? And second part of that, how do we connect with incarcerated people?
Well, so one of the things is that prisoners are seldom heard, right? They're locked away behind steel, whatever. So some of the things that prisoners share, we need people to share them in that voice, without the editing and taking this out. We need ways, prisoners need ways to get their voices out. So I've been gone from prison 4 months. I did 26 years in prison. I can tell you a lot about prison, but there's some things that have changed that I'm not qualified to speak on certain things right now because I'm not there. Now I can relate things, I can share my experiences, but there are some things that people experiencing with COVID right now. I'm not in prison dealing with COVID. I'm not in prison dealing with, so guys tell me that, well, they're transferring guys in with COVID, so I expect to catch it. He said, well, no, they're instead of to social distancing, they're doing just the opposite. Right. So my point, we just have to find ways to, I don't even think it's just find ways. We just have to do it. Sometimes as much as we might want to help, or as much as we want to, or we think we know, we don't. And the people that's directly impacted or affected, they often do know. They often know the solutions. Because people that's sitting around with a problem, often in his mind, he say, man, all they got to do is this, or why don't they do this? A lot of times the people that's affected with or they find ways around or to deal. And a lot of times those ways that the people that's impacted be the most effective ways. And I just think that's a reason why we have to start listening more to impacted populations, whether it's homeless, battered women or prisoners or otherwise.
Oh, unmute. So do you know I don't know what you know. Have you studied prison systems in other countries? There are a couple of questions about that. If there so the questions are, one about Great Britain successfully improving the lives of prisoners, and the other question is whether there are countries with justice systems that are models to be emulated.
So there are, I know the Vera Institute did a very informative piece. I want to say it's on the German prison system. And sorry if I'm quoting that wrong, Germany, but how they want to model the prison system after the community. They want it to be as much community as possible, including not locked doors, etc. So I think there are some things there, but I think ultimately that we don't have a true idea of what sort of justice system we can build because I think as long as the justice system exists, we're going to constantly be trying to reform parts, augment parts, see what we can save, see what we can't. I think ultimately, like I said, we're going to have to do away with this system, and we're not going to know what sort of system to replace it until this one is gone, because it's sort of difficult to see past what already exists, right? A second thing is, I think we need to stop thinking in terms of replacement. Like if we just get rid of this, then we can put this over here. In the end, we may have a justice system that looks nothing like the justice system we have. We may have a justice system that's practiced different in different places. I just think that the thing, I see the way things are now, and they dominate our world so much, we can't think outside of them. Every time we begin to think criminal justice or justice, we're gonna use this system as a reference. And that's the problem. We're using a humanly flawed system as our reference. And as long as it exists, we're going to continue to use it as our reference. We have to start finding ways to eliminate this system.
Yeah, continuing that string of thought, what would it look like in terms of managing people who do commit serious crimes until we can get prevention where it needs to be?
So the most honest answer I can tell you is I don't know. And I think no one knows. Even the people that's against it don't know, because we haven't done it. And not only have we haven't done, we haven't had an opportunity to try. So all the things we say about human capacity to create, human capacity to be ingenuitive, when it comes to the criminal justice system, that stops. There is no capacity to be creative. There is no capacity to do other things, to just try something. And it might not work. But so, and until we get to that point to where I think that we're willing to, like I say, to try different things, not knowing the outcome, not knowing the answer, then we're going to continue to use what we have as a reference, because that's what we know. And that's what most people know. That's what most people reference base is. So.
Right. So when we were talking about other countries, somebody commented that Norway is a good one. And somebody put in the chat, there's an article, vera.org article about Germany. So,
yeah, Lacino was right. The Vera report is about Germany. I think people have seen the movie Where to Invade Next, the Michael Moore documentary, and that shows a vignette of how Norway deals with people convicted of murder. I just want to say there's some people, and I just went around the room. Victor Wallace is here. Susan Berndorf is here. Don Greenspan. Yeah, everyone. These are people that fought for Lacino when he was behind bars. We helped get Rashida Tlaib, the congresswoman, involved in the case. We directly contacted the Wayne County Prosecutor's Conviction Integrity Unit. It's so great that we're all here. Those of you who've donated to Lacino, he needs to stay on his feet. He needs help now. Down the road, I think there's confidence that the lawyers are going to win some compensation from the state, but Lacino is struggling now. Should we have one or two final questions? I know we've already gone.
I have just one last question, and then all of you who've put comments in the chat, we will send that copy of that chat. The hosts of the group will send that to Lacino and Jeff so that he'll see all those comments. The last question has to do with female incarceration, and if you know what are some of the factors that are leading to the increased female incarceration.
Well, one of the factors is, so Black women are the fastest growing population of prisons. For women in general, but Black women in particular. And I think it has a lot to do with the role that women play in our society and maybe not get credit for it, right? So a lot of women in these poor or oppressed communities, they are the community. essentially. And I think that when you go after a community and you've been going after a community for so long, and you continue to go after that community. So the women are what's there, right? The women are what's there. The women are what's there in our community. And I apologize. I mean, I'm trying to say some things in a way where, I don't want to necessarily, offend people, to be real with you. But so Black women are under attack right now. They've been attacking Black men. Black men, for the most part, we know make up a big percentage of the prison population. And if you continue to go after the community, you're going after what's in the community. And a lot of the men are missing. So now the women are what's there, and the women are the same thing that were affecting the men. The same militarized policing that was policing those men that are not there. They're still policing those communities, and the women are there. The women are the ones that are being abused. The men who may have had difficulties economically or job-wise in those communities, those women are having those same sort of difficulties. And sometimes lead to bad choices, and just sometimes lead to situations that, some unfortunate situations.
Should we, I think we might have exhausted Lacino. Thank you, Lacino, for your articulation, for your passion, for telling us part of our world that we care about but don't know about. Thanks to all the sponsoring groups. Thanks to all the activists that helped work to even in our little ways to help free Lacino. Look at what a valuable addition to the outside community he is. And I'll give the last words to Linda.
Well, you said it very well, Jeff. You read my mind. I want to thank you and Lacino for your passionate presentation, and you really opened our eyes. And we're going to do everything we can. And once again, we will publish the GoFundMe link and get it out to all of our members by email as well. And I did want to just take a minute before we close. Charlie Cavell is our Oakland County Commissioner, and he asked if he could make a announcement. Charlie, are you there?
Hey, yeah. Hi. Can you all hear me?
Yes, go
I'm
ahead.
wearing my blue light glasses, life on Zoom, right? You all understand. First I want to say, Mr. Hamilton, I appreciate you being willing to share your story, because I tuned in a little late, and I'm our county commissioner here in Huntington Woods and a few other places. And just for everybody, when I tuned in was right when you were saying, and Aramark does all these terrible things, and the commissary is privatized, and there's kickbacks from the government for people that used phones to be charged from IC Solutions to make phone calls. And so just one, I hear you. And then two, for everyone else, our team of volunteers meets every Saturday at 10 a.m. and we have a kick-ass 17-year-old who is going through the Aramark contract that Oakland County Commission has for the next 2 years, where they do receive a kickback if the county jail is over 1,600 inmates. So what Mr. Hamilton is saying is 100% part of what funds our lifestyle. So you can't sit still on a moving train. So I'd be more than happy to put email contact info and all that. If you're stoked up like we are about this issue that Mr. Hamilton had to live through, would love to channel that energy into something productive and helping our county government get better.
You might remember that Bob Dylan's song about George Jackson. The lyric was, "Sometimes this world seems like one big prison yard. Half of us are prisoners, the other half are guards." Bob Dylan.
Bob
That's good.
Dylan also wrote a song about Reuben Hurricane Carter, who was wrongly incarcerated for so many years.
And I asked Lacino when we first met face to face at a distance, what movies and books they had access to, because, they didn't have the internet. He never had the internet till he got out. And I asked him about a movie that we've all probably seen 15 times, Shawshank Redemption. And, they have basic cable and inside, so they saw all those mass movies.
Mhm.
Yeah, Andy Dufresne. So the one thing is, I think it's important for people to get involved in just any way, right? I don't think we should downplay any level of involvement, right? Whether it's writing letters or contributing money or standing on the picket line, anything that someone is willing to do, I think we should applaud that, right? And second, we need more people to get involved. Like I say, because it's so different. Think about all the people that had to come together and all the things that had to line up in order for me to another quick story. So it was DNA in my evidence. It was DNA evidence in my case the whole time that was hidden. When the DNA evidence was finally tested, the state police said that the DNA could be mine. I know it can't be mine, right? So my lawyers were able to send the DNA to experts who are known as experts throughout the country. My point in saying that is, if we didn't have the money to do that, I'd probably still be in prison. And we only had the money because people were willing to get involved. It's so much that needs to be done, and everything helps. Right. So like, are we talking about the letters? A person might think that, well, you're writing a letter. Those letters did so much for me, for my emotional health and for me mentally, and just helped me keep fighting. Every time somebody plugged in, it helped me. I mean, it's easy for me to try to take the credit, but I just know that without so many people in so many ways, right? Like I said, I don't know if I would be here talking to you today. So that's, to me, the bigger thing is just people just got to get involved in any way. It don't have to be big things or, these grand things that might make the news. It could be it could just be writing somebody, becoming a pen pal or something, and sharing your day with them, and just somebody know that somebody care. I talked to a guy here the other day, and he told me he has no family, no friends, no one. And just to think that a Christmas card, or something, a birthday card, how those things you never know what it might do for a person, and how it could just help a person make it through, so that's the big thing, just if we could just find any way to get involved, no matter how big or small.
That's a
Sounds
good
good.
note. I think, Lacino, thank you so much. I think we've got our marching orders now. We have to get involved one way or the other. You've really told us what we got to do, and here we go. At any rate, I
right.
want to thank both of you for doing this. This was I know everyone, I can tell from all the comments, everyone loved it. We are inspired. We will move forward, and we will be in touch. Thank you so much.
Now, the thank yous all come from me. I want to thank the Huntington Woods Group and the Roots Action and the Jewish Voices for Peace and just everybody, everybody.
And the Bog Center
That's right.
and the
Make sure you got
the
everyone.
Grace Lee Bog Center.
And the Grace
Okay.
Lee Boston. Right.
Goodbye,
All right.
everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so are you going to end the meeting? Melanie?
Yes.
Okay.